Welcome to Hot Seat on Sri Lanka Live. Having entered politics in 1994, he was appointed the Minister of Justice, Constitutional Affairs, Ethnic Affairs and National Integration, and was also the Deputy Minister of Finance and Planning. And he also served as the Minister of Industrial Development and Constitutional Affairs, and was also appointed as the Chief Negotiator in the government's peace process with the LTTE. He served the Minister of Enterprise Development, Industrial Policy and Investment Promotion, and was also the Minister of Constitutional Affairs. And in 2007, he was appointed Minister of Export Development and International Trade, a position which he held until he was appointed the Minister of External Affairs in the year 2010. With me today on Hot Seat is none other than Professor G.L. Peiris. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
First, we'd like to know why Sri Lanka needs the executive presidency.
I think there are a lot of reasons which are not difficult to explain. It is a fact that Sri Lanka's principal problem could not have been dealt with effectively in the absence of the presidential system. We needed a strong, effective government, without which it would not have been possible to grapple with this issue, which has held back our country's development for more than a quarter of a century. Now, it is a great mistake to think that all problems and challenges were over with the termination of the war. That is not the case at all. Today, there are equally serious challenges. The only difference is that those challenges are less obvious than they were at the time of the military action. In those days, the challenges were very obvious, with bombs going off, people dying, suicide missions, intimidation, and the fear which gripped the nation. So the challenges were very obvious. Today, the challenges are less evident, more subtle at the international level. There is today a concerted attempt to isolate our country, to bring pressure to bear on our country. Every 6 months, we have to use a tremendous amount of money, energy, time in order to ward off the challenges in the Human Rights Council. Now we have a situation where false evidence is being gathered against the political leadership and the military leadership of Sri Lanka. There was this incident in Vavuniya about a month ago, where an arrest was made, and there is clear evidence that evidence was being collected, blank sheets of paper with signatures, and a very sophisticated operation that was intended to fabricate evidence and to present it to the investigating panel, the so-called investigating panel. Now some attempt is being made by the authorities in Geneva to find out, to get information about the command structure in the army. This is with a view to bringing serious charges pertaining to war crimes, not only against the service personnel, the commanders, but also against the political leaders, the president, the secretary to the Ministry of Defense, and so on. So all of this is happening. A government which was able to rid the country of terrorism can certainly deal with these challenges. But the fundamental requirement is a strong, effective government with a coherent policy and a clear sense of direction.
But Professor, government appointed the LLRC committee to find the ways and means to have a proper reconciliation process in place. And the recommendations were handed over to the President on the 20th of November in the way back in 2010. But still, the government has failed to implement those recommendations.
No, that's not true at all. The LLRC report consisted of almost 285 recommendations, which were different in character, as one would expect, of the work of a commission which had to embark on such a wide-ranging investigation. So there are different types of issues. Some can be dealt with in the short term. All of that has been done. Matters connected with infrastructure, economic development, livelihoods, the resettlement of internally displaced people, the reintegration into society of ex-combatants, the economic development in the north, the complex demining process, all of that has been attended to. But there are other matters which by their very nature require a longer period to be dealt with. These are matters connected with language, for example. If you ask me what are the most complex issues that the LLRC had to deal with, I would answer without hesitation that they were the land issues, tremendously convoluted. Now, those issues can't be dealt with in a short period. And it is totally false to suggest that the LLRC recommendations have not been implemented. Look at the time that other countries have taken to deal with similar issues, sometimes with less difficult issues in post-conflict situations, whether it is in Cambodia or the former Yugoslavia. They have taken 3 or 4 times as long as we have taken in Sri Lanka. But in none of those situations has there been this degree of pressure exerted on the country in question. So our position is we are moving forward. These recommendations are being implemented in a structured manner. We have to prioritize. You can't do everything at the same time. We have done that. The process is very much in train, and the country needs the space and the time to move forward with this delicate and sensitive process. And what we ask is that the same standards be applied in all post-conflict situations. Why a special standard for Sri Lanka? Why is Sri Lanka being singled out? Why are there far more stringent standards being applied to our country than is the case with any other comparable situation in any part of the world? Now, that is political discrimination. That is the basis of this kind of suggestion that the LLRC recommendations have not been implemented, but that is a suggestion that is totally without foundation.
Professor, don't you think that it is not justifiable for His Excellency the President Mahinda Rajapaksa to ask for another mandate where he has failed to deliver his promise of abolishing of executive presidency at the 2010 elections?
No, that is not. Then President Kumaratunga not only promised to abolish the executive presidency, but even gave a date. If you recall, she stood for election in November 94. Mr. Nihal Galappathy of the Jatika Vimukti Peramuna was going to stand as a candidate. The promise was given to Mr. Galappathy in writing that the executive presidency would be abolished before July 1995. A date was also specified. But it never happened. Now, the executive presidency can be restructured, of course, but I don't think it can be done hastily and ad hoc, because the structure and the functions of the executive presidency are significantly related to other important aspects of the Constitution, in particular the electoral system. You know, I reiterate that what the country needs most at this time is a strong, effective government, not the cauldron of confusion that would inevitably result from the proposals of the joint opposition candidate and the people around him. Now, a strong, effective government in Parliament is not possible under the present electoral system, but under the first past the post system, which we had until 1978, you could have a stable government. President Jayawardena had a 5-6 majority. In 1977, that was under first past the post. Prime Minister Sirimau Bandaranaike in 1970, together with her coalition partners, had a 2/3 majority. That was also under the first past the post system. But under the particular form of proportional representation that we have in our country today, it is very difficult. So if you're reforming the executive presidency, reducing its powers, remodulating some of its structures and organs and so on, undoubtedly as part of that process, as an integral part of that process, you will have to address issues connected with electoral reform. Are we going to have the same system? Will it be a hybrid, that is a combination of first past the post and the proportional representation? Then executive presidential power is also significantly related to government and other levels. We have 4 different levels of government in Sri Lanka. We have the presidency, we have parliament, we have the provincial councils, and we have the Pradeshi Sabhas. So the distribution of powers, the interaction of these institutions one with the other in the overall framework of governance in the country are matters that have to be addressed holistically, comprehensively, not one piece of the jigsaw. You have to look at the total picture and decide what reforms are necessary. Now, this cannot be done in 3 weeks. So this is why it would make sense to have a constituent assembly of the kind that Dr. Colvin de Silva had in 1972 when he was Minister of Constitutional Affairs. He was the principal architect of the 1972 constitution which established the Republic of Sri Lanka. Until that time we were a dominion. We recognized the Queen as a head of state, but under the 1972 constitution we became a republic, and Mr. William Gopal Lava became the first president. Of course, it was a titular ceremonial presidency, not the executive presidency, which Jaya Jayawardena introduced in 1978. A constituent assembly is a suitable instrument to address all these issues together. So that is very much an option after the presidential election, but the point to be stressed is that you can't deal with the executive presidency in isolation of all the other issues which are inherently and organically connected with Article 3, Article 4, Article 4b, which deals with executive power. All of that is interconnected.
With me is Professor G.A. Peiris, Minister of External Affairs, on the hot seat today. Welcome back to Hot Seat on Sri Lanka Live. With me is the Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.A. Peiris. Professor Peiris, would like to know, what are the proactive measures that your ministry, the Ministry of External Affairs, have taken to avoid the re-emergence of the terrorism the world over against Sri Lanka?
Several measures. We have reached out to countries that were potentially capable of giving us strong support because of their history, because of their culture. Take for instance our relations with the continent of Africa. They were very weak, almost non-existent at the time President Rajapaksa took office. But he decided that the time has come to take a close look at the priorities governing our relations with the rest of the world. I mean, the truth is that since 1948, we have mechanically followed the pattern of relations which had been established by the British. We uncritically followed that. I'm not saying that relations with Western Europe are not important. They are very important because Western Europe is basically the market for our exports. There's no question about it. But that does not mean that we must neglect other parts of the world as we had done. In Africa, the whole of the continent of Africa, we had only 4 resident missions. Only 4. We had resident missions in South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and Libya. Nowhere else. In the whole of West Africa, there was not one single mission, not one. So we changed all that. We established missions in Nigeria, Uganda, the Seychelles, in all those areas. And that served us well. Hardly anybody realizes how difficult it was to ward off opposition from powerful countries with regard to hosting the Commonwealth Summit in our country in November last year. Strong opposition, not from a lot of countries, but a few very powerful countries. Who made it possible for us to have the summit here? And that brought a great deal of renown and glory to Sri Lanka. The African countries, the Asian members of the Commonwealth all stood together and in one voice insisted that these opportunities should be available to a developing country like Sri Lanka. So they demonstrated a real spirit of solidarity. So we have had this focus on our relations with Asia, with Africa. Now we are reaching out to Latin America. Recently, President Rajapaksa attended the meeting of G77 plus China in Bolivia. That was at a time when he was particularly busy, but he undertook that visit and it paid rich dividends because it gave him the opportunity of establishing a rapport with leaders of Latin American countries.
But Professor, don't you think that the government has failed to take, like, as I mentioned, the proactive measures to avoid the re-emergence of LTTE overseas? Especially the Ministry of External Affairs has even failed to send a lawyer when the EU lifted the ban on the LTTE.
No, that matter has been explained over and over again in Parliament and outside Parliament. We were not parties to their action at all. Then, if we ask to intervene as a party, we are submitting Sri Lanka to the jurisdiction of a European court, which we had never done. And that is the basic reason why we are not cooperating with the international investigation mandated by the Human Rights Council in Geneva, because we are not prepared to submit our country to the jurisdiction of a foreign court. It has very serious consequences for our country. Now, what were the issues involved in this litigation? They were technical, legal, procedural issues. The court says that 3 times in its judgment. If it was a matter relating to evidence, the matters of detail relating to Sri Lankan situations, then there is a case for us to ask to intervene. There's no guarantee that we would have been allowed to intervene, but then that makes sense. But when the arguments are purely of a technical nature and there is nothing special that Sri Lanka can contribute by appearing as a party, there's nothing within our special knowledge that is relevant to the litigation, then we had to weigh the pros and cons. What do we gain by intervening as a party? What do we lose by intervening as a party? When you weigh the 2 things in the balance, the disadvantages of submitting Sri Lanka to the jurisdiction of a foreign court, the disadvantages far outweigh the benefits. So what we did was, it is not correct that we didn't send, we hired a law firm in Brussels. We worked closely with the European Council and with many of the countries that comprise the European Union, in particular the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, which were parties. And then the present position is that the European Council has decided to appeal against the judgment. So they're doing that with our full support. But for us to do it ourselves, as a party appearing before the European Court, would have brought about consequences which are clearly detrimental to the national interest of Sri Lanka. Now, I have explained this in Parliament, I've explained this in interviews. And when I explained it in Parliament, the opposition did not reject that explanation. There was no retort or rejoinder, because it is logical, it makes sense, and it is that course of action that is in the national interest of Sri Lanka.
Right. Professor, coming back to your ministry, the Ministry of External Affairs, what is the role of the monitoring MP appointed to monitor the Ministry of External Affairs?
Monitoring MP does administrative work which is asked to do, which is entrusted with. The monitoring MP plays a limited and useful role. He does not make policy. He works under the direction of the minister and the deputy minister, who themselves are implementing policy which is intimately discussed with the president at every point.
But do you think to have like 3 people running the show, apart from the permanent secretary of the ministry, in such a small country like Sri Lanka, is it appropriate?
Yeah, well, the question assumes that the monitoring MP runs the show. He does nothing of the sort. Monitoring MPs are there in other ministries also. External Affairs is not the only ministry that has a monitoring MP, but the monitoring MP in any ministry does not run the show at all. He acts under the direction of the minister, and he performs basically a facilitating role. There's nothing wrong with that, and it has been useful in a lot of situations.
But the opposition levels allegations against the Ministry of External Affairs, especially about the appointment of non-career diplomats overseas, especially people who had some connections with the high powers in the government.
Well, I mean, that's a practice. Who started the practice? President Jayawardena appointed a diplomatic officer in London.
But is it necessary to carry out the same practice?
No, it is not necessary, but governments all over the world do appoint. I mean, the United States appoints political people to its missions. Usually the American ambassador in London is almost invariably a political appointee. So nobody raised this issue when other governments did it, but any stick is good enough to hit the present government with. The situations were the same earlier. And also this now, the people who object to the appointment of people from outside, the so-called political appointees, forget now who are their role models. They are extolling the virtues of Dayan Jatilaka, Tamara Kunanagam, Chris Nunes. Who are they? Are they career officers? They're all political appointees. So you can't have it both ways. The candid answer to that question is that some of the people who came from outside are doing a tremendously successful job. And of course, that does not mean that the career people are lacking or deficient in any way. It is not that one category is superior to the other. You need a mix of the two categories. It doesn't matter whether an officer is political or career. If he has a contribution to make and if his performance is satisfactory, then that needs to be acknowledged.
But Professor, people such as Dayan Jatilaka and Chris Nunes, they were doing a commendable job. But at the end, they were sidelined. That's what the opposition alleges.
No, that's not true. That is totally false. I don't think it is appropriate in an interview of this nature to comment on individuals, their performance, and to evaluate that. That's not proper for the External Affairs Minister of the country to evaluate individuals in a public interview. But nobody is perfect. Everybody has shortcomings. And it is wrong to regard some people as demigods who are perfect. There is nothing of the sort. I mean, all these people had, shortcomings, which is to be expected. So that is wrong, and the opposition has been totally biased and lacking in a sense of balance. Have they given the External Affairs Ministry any credit for making a success, not only of the Commonwealth Summit, but take the Youth Conference, where Minister Dalasala Peruma took the principal initiative. That was commended all over the world. Tell me, when in Sri Lanka's history did so many dignitaries visit us within so short a time? The number one leader from China. China has never sent its number one leader to this country at any time. President Xi Jinping came here. Within 10 days, we had the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. We have had high-profile visitors from almost every part of the world. At that time, we had the Foreign Minister of Spain. So it is not true to say that Western Europe has some kind of deep hatred of, there are issues on which we have fundamental disagreements with some of those countries. But then Spain sent its foreign minister here, and at the United Nations General Assembly, King Philip VI of Spain had some very cordial discussions with President Mahinda Rajapaksa. So we have had presidents, we have had prime ministers. Look at the relationship with Australia. Was it a good relationship 5 years ago? Compare the situation then and what it is now. Now, Australia, New Zealand are countries with which we have excellent relations. Those things didn't happen by chance, by coincidence, fortuitously. They were the result of policies which were formulated and implemented with a great deal of care and finesse. It took a lot of doing, and a lot of people contributed. Now, when you spoke of, what about Thisara Samarasinghe in Australia? Hasn't he done an excellent job? Why don't we recognize it? So the fact that he is from the Navy, does that disqualify him? So that is wrong. That is a fundamentally unacceptable yardstick for judging people.
With me is Prof. Peiris, Minister of External Affairs, on the hot seat today. Welcome back to Hot Seat on Sri Lanka Live. With me is Professor Peiris, Minister of External Affairs. Professor Peiris, owing to the executive presidency, aren't we experiencing a family bandism in this regime?
No, that is why is the same criticism not made of the Kennedys in the United States? What was Robert Kennedy's special? Robert Kennedy was the brother of John Kennedy. Then the Kennedys have played a major role there. And in other Asian countries, isn't that very much a part of the political culture? The Gandhis, the Nehru-Gandhi family in India, the Bhuttos in Pakistan, the Aquinos in the Philippines. It so happens that people in those countries have faith, have confidence in these families, and they vote for them. That is the fundamental point. The members of these families are holding positions in public life because of the colossal support they have from the voter, from the community. Then what is the rationale underpinning the argument? Are we saying that the people should not be able to elect persons of their choice simply because those persons belong to a particular family? President Rajapaksa was elected to this position by 1.8 million, 18 lakhs of votes was his majority on the last occasion in 2010. Basil Rajapaksa, with something like 450,000 preference votes in Gampaha, performed uniquely. Namal Rajapaksa in Hambantota came first in the district, again with almost an unprecedented majority in terms of preference votes. Chamal Rajapaksa, the eldest in the family, was elected very convincingly by the people of Hambantota.
But those are the elected members. But how about the non-elected, the relatives? Professor?
Well, I challenge anybody to say that Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has not played a role in eradicating terrorism in this country. So it is the initiatives of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa under the direction of the president, and indeed the relationship between the two, the blood relationship, which certainly enhanced the confidence. In previous times, it didn't work so well. It didn't work so well because nobody believed that terrorism could be eradicated by military means in Sri Lanka. Nobody believed it. Because the consistent advice that we were given by knowledgeable people, military attaches of the large missions in Colombo, for example, consistently, steadfastly said, it is a pipe dream to expect to defeat terrorism militarily. It must be done through negotiation. Now, what was thought to be impossible of accomplishment was in fact achieved. The military defeat of a terrorist organization which was described by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States as the most relentless, the most dangerous terrorist outfit on the planet. So they were defeated. It was no mean feat. And it was due to a combination of factors. For one thing, political will, determination. Secondly, the choice of the right people for the right jobs and the provision of resources which would enable them to deliver. And also the conduct of foreign policy. There were occasions in the past when victory was within reach, but the entire operation had to be called off because of strong pressure that was exerted from overseas. Now, President Rajapaksa was able to handle that situation and to ensure that history did not repeat itself in that unfortunate manner. In all of that, the Secretary to the Ministry of Defense played a vital role. I don't think anybody in the country seriously disputes that.
Professor, we saw a lot of crossovers from the government side to the opposition during the past couple of weeks. How would these affect the government in the long run? Well, especially facing the snap polls.
Psychologically, it has some impact, but frankly, I think our people are not deeply impressed by crossovers. They are accustomed to it every week, people crossing from this side to that side. I don't think that is a critical factor in the formation of public opinion. The critical factor should consist of the issues. That's very important. And today, I think there is growing realization in the country what the consequences would be if Mr. Maithripala Sirisena and the very loose combination of parties around him capture power. Not that that is going to happen.
But even the government is an alliance.
The government is an alliance, but it is an alliance with a clear direction and with a dominant party. There are no fundamental inconsistencies and contradictions within it. When there are issues, we discuss, and this is very different. How are you going to reconcile the TNA and the JHU? Are there policies capable of reconciliation? Can you have even a minimum consensus? Can you reconcile the economic policy of the UNP with the JVP? It is chalk and cheese, black and white.
But JVP and TNA, they have not still decided on their mandate.
No. Then how is it that a leading member of the TNA appeared on Mr. Sirisena's platform in Mathura? Surely that is a clear indication. So it is a hodgepodge. I have described it as a cauldron of confusion. And it is a kind of, it would be a non-government. It is not a question of deciding whether it is a good government or a bad government. It is a non-government. It would be impossible to come up with any kind of policy which is backed up by all the people who comprise that government, and the result will be chaos verging on anarchy. Economic policy with regard to the 13th Amendment, who is going to be defense minister, relations with other countries, neighboring countries that are important. There is a total lack of consistency even at the basic level. And I think people are beginning to realize this. The sole purpose why these people are getting together is to dislodge President Mahinda Rajapaksa. That is the aim. What happens thereafter is a very secondary matter. The whole idea is to defeat the president. That's it. Then what sort of government is to be formed thereafter? What policies would it implement? Those are very secondary issues which frankly have received no consideration at all. The whole thrust of this initiative is to unseat the incumbent president. That's it.
Professor, finally would like to know, how confident is the government of Sri Lanka, the present government, in facing the January 8th elections?
We are very confident on very rational grounds. It's not wishful thinking, on very logical, rational grounds. President, soon after handing in his nomination paper, in a brief address in Korte, said in 2005 he promised to eradicate terrorism. Didn't he do it? In 2010, he promised to use the stability that had been engendered by the defeat of terrorism to develop infrastructure, to improve the economy, to address all the matters which are connected with uplifting the economic standards of people. Has he not done that? Has there been no development? What about infrastructure? It's a different world. Look at the city of Colombo. Has he not performed? Has he not delivered on that promise? Then he said, continuity. In 2014, what he is promising is a disciplined society and to bring into being the structures that would enable such a society to be formed. So continuity is important. I think the business community is also realizing this. In order to make a success of commercial operations, the fundamental requirement is stability. If you have chaos, if you have turbulence, investment will be affected. That is going to impact on jobs, on standards of living. I think these are the reasons why we have total confidence that the President will receive a resounding endorsement by the people of our country on the 8th of January.
Thank you very much, Professor G.A. Peiris, Minister of External Affairs, talking to us today in this edition of Hot Seat on Sri Lanka Live.